Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
I'm Susan Kaufman. I'm here for Attitude Magazine, and you are listening to Attitude's ADHD Experts. Today's topic is blame, excuses, defensive behavior. As adults with ADHD, we've all been affected by the sense that something's deeply wrong with us. And we've begun to ask ourselves, what's wrong with me? Why doesn't anyone understand what's happening to me? And really to fall back on a whole set of defensive behaviors that are almost second place to those of us with ADHD. I'm very pleased today to welcome Joyce Kubik. She is one of the first people to really address this emotional side of ADHD that we're all beginning to turn to nowadays. She's a certified master coach, which is the highest level of coaching. She's an ADHD coach and skills trainer. She's president of the ADHD Coaches Organization, and I recommend that to you, ADHDcoaches.org, if you're looking for a coach. And she has lots of other degrees in psychology and so forth. Joyce is the author of a really terrific memoir called Unraveling ADHD. I love her subtitle, How I Turned My Greatest Deficit into My Greatest Asset. And it's one of the few memoirs about living with ADHD, and she describes her childhood and early adult years when she did not understand what she was going through, and then what happened when she got diagnosis and how she changed her life. So you can find that on her website, which is called bridgetosuccess.net, or on Amazon.com. And that's, again, Unraveling ADHD. Joyce is also the author of Plan for Success, which are planning journals and systems for time management for both students and adults. Hugely helpful, very highly recommended by those who've used them. Also available, it's called Plan for Success on Amazon and on her website, bridgetosuccess.net. Today, Joyce is going to talk about how to understand the feelings that come along with attention deficit and why we use blame, defensiveness, and excuses so commonly in our lives. So, Joyce, thank you so much for being here today. We're excited to have someone with your experience and personal experience with this topic. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Susan, for the introduction. And it's really good to be here. And today, as she said, we're going to talk about using blame, excuses, and being defensive. And really, what does it really have to do with ADHD? And how can we stop it? Do we even realize after so many years of growing up with ADHD that we're even doing that? In my work as a coach, I've been coaching now for nearly 16 years. I work with these families, I work with adults, and every time they don't understand fully that they're using blame, excuses, and being defensive. It's as if every day of our life, we're trying to figure out how to get through it without somebody saying, you're not doing this right, you're late for that, why did you do that, why don't you do it this way? They're always trying to help us. But no one's ever explained to us exactly how our mind works. No one is able to really realize the emotional side that has built up over many, many years. Think of all those years that you grew up. If you are 40, 50 years old, for the last 35 years, people have been saying to you, you're not doing it right. How about you try this? Or, the usual ones, you need to focus. You need to just stay on task. Don't think about anything else. Well, in my mind, it's as if, when you sit at a railroad track and all these railroad cars go by, there's like 60 cars in the train. And every time a car goes by, it's another thought. And off of that thought comes another one and another one. And the train just keeps rolling by. Our mind never stops processing. So it's pretty hard for us to hold still and just do what we need to do. So that causes a lot of problems. And when people start talking to us and kind of beating us up, really. And of course, we always beat ourselves up real well, too. So we grow up with these feelings. And all of a sudden, it's like we're so tired of letting people down that all we want to do is just get out of this situation. To get out of it, we're going to use blame. It wasn't my fault. Somebody else did it. Somebody else was here. This happened, that happened. We use excuses. And the excuses are probably things that they have heard over and over again. Yet we just sort of put a little twist to it, and hopefully it will get by with it. And we start to do this not because we want to tell lies and not because we want to come across as somebody who's constantly making excuses. It's a way of survival for us. I feel like my whole life was just one of every single day just trying not to get in trouble. And over a course of a lifetime, it has caused problems cognitively, emotionally, and behaviorally. It's not a lot of fun when I can't think and when I can't answer a question. It makes me feel stupid. I'm constantly going, trying to formulate the words to get them out. So then people just jump in and speak for me. And I don't like that. Then I have to explain why I couldn't get the words out really quick, or that was just what I was going to say. And we go again, start getting into excuses. We also become very defensive. So all three of these that you see on the screen, cognitive, emotional, and behavioral, we're all affected by that, very much so, as we get into adulthood. It actually starts very early in life, but as the years go by, if we can go to the next slide, we begin to feel that nobody understands me. I can't get anything right, and there's something definitely wrong with me. And we play these messages over and over and over, continually getting caught off guard and having to go back to making blame, excuses, and being defensive. This is no way to live. We have to get ourselves out of this mode. It's not a lot of fun getting up every day and subconsciously knowing that I'm going to have to defend myself all day long. And I'm not saying that every single person with ADD does this. I would say they do this, but maybe not every day. For me, it was quite a journey for me to try to figure out why people don't understand me. It's as if I spoke a foreign language. And I still have those problems today. And I had to learn how not to get defensive. When I would say something, let's say to my husband, I would explain something, how we're going to do a project in the yard or something like that. And he'd say, well, I have an idea. Let's do it this way. And what he does, he says the exact same thing that I just said, but in his words. And I can't tell you how much that happens to me. And then the frustration starts and the anger starts. And it's like, can't you hear? I just said that. It's the same thing I just said. Over time, I wanted to get out of that mode. I didn't like being that way. I didn't like always yelling at somebody and saying, that's just what I said, defend, defend, defend. So now what I'm really trying to do is I go and I teach people how they process information differently and how we can learn to a process here that we can use to identify what it means to use blame, excuses, and be defensive, and how we control this. You can use this in whole families. You can use this in offices, and it builds great communication skills, because I firmly believe if we don't have good communication skills with ADD, then it's going to make it very difficult for us to manage our life every day. We can't go through life just using these three methods of survival every day. It's a lot of stress that it puts us through, a lot of anger. And emotionally, we feel drained by the end of the day, not just because of our jobs, but because we have had to try and survive all day long and sort of dodge the bullet, so to speak. So what you're looking at on this screen is a diagram that I use to help people to begin to observe and recognize what are their signs of being defensive. Blaming excuses is easy to explain. So that's the first two on there. But when we look at the word defensive, do we really know what it means to us? Do we really know that we are being defensive? I can tell you that whether it's a young student, college student, or an adult, they truly don't know. Oftentimes in families, I will ask the student what it means to be defensive. And of course, I have to give examples of when you're playing soccer, there's an offense and a defense. So they'll come up often with, well, if I think about it with people, I'm trying to protect myself instead of the goal. I'm being defensive. So now I want to know, what are his signs? What are the things that he can realize that he's getting defensive? And we look at defensive as being a bit anxious. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 up at the top right-hand side of the slide there. And I asked them to give me 3 things about their voice. And they can usually tell me that they get loud. That would be the first one. and that they might talk fast. That's the second one. And the third one, let's see, we have the loud voice, fast speech, and a raised voice. So the voice gets a little bit higher pitched. They usually can tell me those three. It's the fourth one that really confuses them. It's about their body language. What do they look like just before they're about to explode? And they're about to get anxious and just start yelling at everybody and using blame and using excuses. They really can't tell me too much. They might tell me that their face might get red. They might tell me that. Sometimes the students will say, or the adults will say, I just take my arm and I'm so mad at what's going on and I just clear the whole table off. That I just slam doors until I start feeling good. You just get really loud. But that's not what I'm looking for. Those are the outcomes. I want to know that instant in your mind, in your body language, of what's happening to you so that you can catch this before it gets to the point that you are just hitting something or clearing off a table with your arm or yelling so loud that the neighbors and everybody else can hear you. If I ask a student what number 4 is, the body language, they can't really tell me. But if I ask the student, what about your mom or your dad? What do they look like just before they're about to explode? And of course, we all sit there kind of smiling because this student then can turn around and totally identify right down to the eyelash of what their mom looks like. The big buggy eyes, they stand really tall and stiff, cross their arms. And I said, exactly. I want to know what your signs are. And the only one that can tell him what his signs are the parent. And then he starts to get it. And then he starts coming up with a few things. That they do pace, that their eyes are wide open, that their shoulders are up in the air, clenched fists, or they twitch their mouth a little bit. Now I have something that they can work with before they get angry. And as adults, we have to do the exact same thing. We have to start observing what are our signs. We know the top 3, the loud voice, the raised voice, and the fast speech. But it's that fourth one that we really have to understand. So during your days ahead of you here, you need to be identifying that. What are your signs? If you don't know, if you have children, ask a child. If you have a spouse, ask a spouse. They see us. They know that boiling point. When you look at the diagram is showing us the circle that has the top part is the minus and the bottom part is the plus. And the B, the E, and the D is there. So information comes into us through the 5 senses. And now we have to deal with that information. If we are using blame, excuses, and being defensive, we're going to head right into that circle with the minus top part with the minus in it. And that's going to end up getting us in trouble. We have to learn, and I learned this, basically I learned this from a psychologist, and I sort of enhanced it a little bit in my coaching practice. But we basically have to learn how to vision the stop sign. And I have the people draw their stop sign. They can make it look any way they want. They can decorate it, do everything they want. But it's a visual that, I hear myself. I'm using blame. I'm using excuses. My voice is loud. I'm in trouble. I'm standing really stiff and straight up or leaning forward into the person. So now I'm beginning to use this. I better get out of this mode because I'm headed for trouble. Because we know that if we start raising our voice, the other person's going to start raising their voice. And then we end up in a yelling match, which just doesn't get us anywhere. And the ADD person will defend. Remember that every thought produces another thought, so there's really never an end to that conversation. But really nobody wins. So we need to get out of this path as soon as we recognize what we're doing. We need to stop. There's an arrow pointing to the circle below that says, I know, because we do know what to do. We do know that we just simply have to take ownership of what happened. That's going to help us to stay in the plus, sort of the triangle between the stop sign, the plus sign, and the I know. That's what the goal of this whole thing is to be able to identify it and get out of it. And I can't tell you what freedom you will feel when you start gaining control and you don't go down that entire path into the troubled area. And the more often you catch it, lower your shoulders, watch that body language, the more likely you are to start stopping so much sooner and just simply answering the question. And answering it in just a few words as you need. Not these very long explanations that we love to go in, but nobody likes to hear them. Just simply answer the question. No excuses, no blame. Don't defend yourself. Just answer the question. Hard to do. And the older you are, it's hard to do. Teaching people at a younger age is just great. It's wonderful. They're able to start very early on and catch that and say, I don't need to do that. I just simply need to answer the question and state what I'm doing. Get people to understand me as me and not let them try to turn me into them, because I can't function as them. I can only function as me, but I can try to adjust things and my behavior so that we can work together. Another thing that I try to help people with too is when they are in conversation and they get into that defensive mode, is this acronym I use, FED. Some of you may have heard something similar to this. But when I'm in a conversation, let's say you're with your boss and something hasn't gone very well, and you're trying to make them understand. If we get emotional, then they're going to get emotional. We need to figure out how to get out of the emotional conversation and simply stick to the facts. Before any meeting that I would have, I used to write down, here are the points, here are the facts of this conversation. And then I tried one time to just never get emotional because I recognized I get emotional so easily. So we just simply stuck to the facts. And it helped so much, I just couldn't even believe how it worked so well. If I get emotional, they do, and that becomes the conversation. So I stick to the facts, and I don't use any defensive language, which brings us back to the blame and making excuses. So that's pretty much what I wanted to tell you. I want you to remember that we don't choose to be forgetful. This is who we are, not that we're forgetful people, but this is how we think. This is how we process. And in certain situations in life, we just can't be ADD. I have to tell you that I take Sundays off from trying to be and fit in all day long with all the work that I have to do. And Sunday's my day to bounce off the wall, start 6 projects in the house, go out in the yard and do a little bit of work, make half the dinner, come back in, put that pot of water on again because it's already boiled away. But that's my day, just to be me. And I love that day. Just get in the car, go down to the lake. That's okay to do that. We need to explain to family how to manage the blame excuses through the diagram that I just talked about. This is a family thing, because whether you're ADD or not, if you have ADD in your household, you're going to hear more of the blame excuses and being defensive. All people do these things, but ADD tends to do it on a pretty regular basis. So when you do this with the whole family, you can even make this a fun thing to do. I had somebody who did this as a party, at their party, and everybody that came in, they had signs up that said, no blame excuses or being defensive, no toxic help. Right? And they did. They started catching each other, and everybody was starting to laugh because they couldn't believe how often they used it. So observe yourself. How often do you do this, and how can you get it to slow down? Learn what the signs are. Identify your body language, and this will all help you to take control. When somebody enters that path to getting into trouble, what you can do to help a person learn that they're actually starting to use blame excuses and they're actually getting defensive is you can say to them in a very calm, quiet voice, let me try that again. For example, I would say to my daughter, do you know where the dog's leash is? My daughter is ADD and had a lot of problems with anger and things like that, and always felt that she was being accused of something. And people, especially adults with ADD, it just seems like we just feel like everybody is that I have to defend myself. Everybody's out to get me. So I would say to her, do you know where the dog's leash is? In a quiet, calm voice. And she'd turn around and say, well, how do I know where it's at? What are you asking me for? You blame me for everything. I hate this place. And out the door she'd go. And I thought, all I asked was, where's the dog's leash? So then the next thing I do is I say to her, and she already knew about this idea of trying to stop and control it and hearing your voice and watching your behavior. But it was hard for her to learn it. So when she would go off on me like that, I would say, let me try that again. And then you would see her shoulders would drop. She felt bad. I wasn't going to yell at her and reprimand her. We were done with that. So she felt bad, and I just said, let me try that again. And then she'd say, I would ask the question, and she'd say, no, Mommy, I don't know where it's at. I didn't say, was that better? I'm so glad you remembered to do that. I just said, thank you. And that was the end of it. We all have to learn, and we're all going to have our emotions up and down throughout the day. And it's really nice to have a friend in the house who can just say, let me try that again, reminding them that they didn't pay attention and that they got loud. So this is an easy way to do it. Remember to use FE&D. Don't focus on the emotions and behaviors. Just stick to the facts. And develop a solution that can be used the next time. It's so much nicer when we can talk and have control of our conversations.
Thanks so much, Joyce. One of the questions here is from someone who says, Jean, that he's read about the technique called surf the urge, which is to be aware of a stimulation and rather than to have a quick response, to understand the moment and to sort of surf past the urge to respond emotionally or with a response that you'll regret. Is that a similar technique, he wonders? Is that something analogous to what you're describing?
Well, it certainly sounds like it. Surf the urge, to me it just sounds like they're saying, observe, just kind of watch what you're doing, listen, pay attention. And is that urge there before it happens? And if that's what he means, then yes, I would say so.
How do people train themselves to do that? What are some, I think in the moment it's very difficult to stop.
Yes.
What have you found to be successful to help people sort of halt a defensive reaction before it starts?
Mm-hmm. I first have them spend a week just observing what their signs are, because you can't stop it if you don't know what the signs are. So I have them write down for me a few of the times when they lost their temper and they got into this blame excuses and being defensive. So I have them write it out. Some of them will actually use a journal and just simply write down, here's what happened and what I said, and I wish I had never said it. So now they understand, they have to write down their body language too. So now they have learned what those signs are. So each time they start yelling, what they find out is that I catch it sooner and I don't yell as much. So eventually it gets lesser and lesser because they know what those signs are. So observing it and writing it down is more powerful than keeping it in your head.
Also interesting. So the key thing is to actually, I guess it's related to mindfulness, which we hear frequently, to be very mindful of an observant of your own behavior.
That's right.
Pat has asked, what are some examples of defensive language?
I guess a couple examples would be, why do you think I did that? Mm-hmm. Or I wasn't able to complete that task at work, or I was late for that meeting. And I might turn around and say, I'm not the only one that's late. There are other people in the office that are late. That's being defensive.
Okay. So that comes back to just the facts. Yeah. Well, right. Alan asks a question which I think is very relevant to all of us with ADHD. How can you tell if the person you're dealing with is really not attacking you or if they're actually treating you the way it feels to you that they're treating you? I think that ability to read the situation is something that we cope with.
Yes. When you have to remember that there are years have gone by of us defending that it's the only way that we can think. It's almost like an addiction. And I usually draw a picture of a circle and just think of it as a brain. And then I have all these little lines of all the bits of information and choices that we have of things to say. But there's this one line that turns into a deep, dark path. And it seems that the older we are with ADD, the wider this path gets. And in my mind, the first place I head when somebody talks to me is into that defensive path. And I'm sure that that person, because of all the years that I have put up with people saying I'm not doing something right, I'm sure that that person is accusing me of something. And it's wrong. My daughter and I, when she would speak to me in her teenage years, she would talk to me. I was preparing my defense. When I would say something to her, she was preparing her defense. And all it did was build walls where no communication could happen. So what people have to do is to be able to take things face value. When somebody says something to you and you think that they're accusing you and you are almost 100% correct, either take the comment face value if you can and simply answer the question in just a few words. Don't go into explanations or anything. Just it's a yes, it's a no, it's maybe a half a dozen words or more after that. But then you could also turn around and say, with a smile, should I be offended? Or I'm not sure I'm understanding what you say. Or here's what I think you're saying to me. But you always use a calm voice.
That's an interesting strategy. So you're saying whether or not, rather than spending time wondering whether you should respond defensively or not, just assume that it's a neutral question and answer it as a neutral question, but then ask calmly, did you mean to that's fascinating. Yeah.
And believe me, people will tell you if they did mean it in a wrong way, in a derogative way. They will say, no, this is what I meant. Because I've said to people, are you trying to say that I didn't do my job? And they say, no, that's not what I said. Or they might just turn around and say, well, that is where I'm heading. I need to talk to you about it. So now I have something to think about. He's not just trying to slam me and get rid of me. He wants to talk about it. And we misread those signs because of years and years of guilt and anger that nobody understands me.
Okay.
So step back.
Yeah, that's great. That's so helpful. I had never thought of it that way. Just make the assumption from the get-go that this is a neutral statement, respond to it that way, but then ask also neutrally. That's a really good idea. Joyce, if you can speak a little more loudly, or else see if your mic is positioned through in front of your face, because people are posting that they can hear me clearly, but you're much more muted.
That.
Okay.
All right, I'll speak up a little louder. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. To this point of not of having a delay in processing, a number of people, suffer from that. And one person, Christine, says, I always seem to forget the answer in the moment, but 2 minutes later I can recall the information. It makes me feel stupid. Is this common for people with ADHD?
It's very common.
What is that about? I mean,
I do it all the time. If you talk to me about ADHD, there's no pause. I know what I'm talking about. I know the answers right away. If you talk to me about something else, it becomes somewhat abstract to me. Even though I know the answers, it takes me a while to recall it. I remember everything. It just takes me a little bit to recall it. We had to learn in our family, because everybody in my family has ADD, ADHD, anxiety, depression, and even a little bit of Asperger's. So we're just a great poster family here. But everybody in our family had to learn about our different processing, how we process things differently, and have that respect. And if we can do that in the home, it just feels so much better. So when we ask somebody a question and we see the pause, we don't push and say, well, come on, tell me what's the answer. I know you know it. We learn how to back down on that and just simply wait. But the person with ADD, when they have to pause and they're with people that they don't know, they really have to learn how to say, give me a second. Because what happens is when somebody asks us a question, we instinctively know that we're not going to get the answer out right away, and we can't recall it. And then we start getting a little bit anxious and worked up. And then we can't think because we're anxious. It's like a roadblock in our brain. So we have to learn
Right.
how to be calm and just say, give me a second. Or if you're in a business situation, saying, I have that answer for you, and if you can, I'll get the best answer for you when I go back to my desk, and I'll email it to you.
Okay. So Deb says, I work in a chaotic and fast-paced workplace, and I really am embarrassed when I don't catch on quickly, and I don't find my colleagues patient. And I feel inadequate. I haven't made them aware that I have ADHD. Do you suggest that I do so? Do you have a point of view on that? That's a tough one, Deb.
I do have a point of view, and sometimes it depends on where you work, but basically, no, I don't recommend that. In my book, there's a great story about my effort to expose that I was ADHD. Didn't go well at all. I wouldn't. I would simply be, if you're in a workplace situation and somebody wants you to do something and everything is distracting all around you, I would simply ask for a place that I can go and work and focus a little bit better. I wouldn't say anything about being ADD. What typically happens in a situation of exposing yourself to that or disclosing it is that anything that goes wrong, they begin to blame on your ADD. And I've seen people lose a job because the boss didn't understand it, didn't know what it was about. All he knew is now he had a reason for maybe dismissing you or coming up with something, just saying everything's ADD, and that doesn't make you feel good at all. So
Right.
I wouldn't recommend it. I would simply ask questions around it or ask for a little bit of time so that you can go someplace where you can be calm and figure out the answer.
Okay.
It doesn't always, you can't always do that.
One person, Tabitha, who posted that she actually had a great experience sharing her ADHD with her managers, but she's very aware that most people don't have that kind of work environment.
Yes.
Let me just chime in to say here that our experts on Attitude magazines pretty much universally advise against using ADHD in the workplace as a reason for anything, suggesting, just as you did instead, that people articulate clearly what they need to do to be successful on the job in a neutral, non-disability fashion, right? There are a number of questions here from people who have family members who have ADHD, who act defensively, aggressively, over-respond, and they're wondering, how do they help that person realize, how do they communicate to that person without running into that blame defensive wall, and then secondarily, how do they help that person, the ADHD or ADD person, realize that they are hyper-defensive? And then the third part of that question, some people who are coaches are on this webinar wondering, how do they best work with teens or adults who have this kind of reaction? So I guess is a whole another issue.
Well, they're going to get a copy of this presentation.
Yes.
So they will have that drawing. It's very effective that you sit down with somebody, with a child, and you explain to them that these are the things, the blame, excuses, and being defensive, that's happening in this family. We do it as a family thing. We don't want to expose just one person. So as a family, if we can sit down and decide that this week we will identify what our signs are. You can't help somebody not to not be defensive if they don't even understand what their signs are to identify that they are defensive. If you've tried as a family and the person is not cooperative and wants nothing to do with it, then they might need a therapist to help them understand what you're trying to do. Because sometimes these teens are so wounded through the years between schools that they attend, programs that they're in, they've seen so many doctors and this and that, they're tired of it. They don't want to hear it anymore. So you need a practical approach. Coaches are very good at helping families to be able to get through things like this because they give strategies. They don't talk therapy. But if a coach realizes that they can't reach them through simple techniques similar to what I use, then they will recommend also a therapist. But I would definitely start with that diagram, with everybody spending time writing down what their signs are. I've seen a family actually have a lot of fun where everybody sat down and identified each other's. And they say, oh, your eyes get so big. And, but you have to have a good spirit and clear heart sometimes to be able to do that. Depends on the families.
Joyce, can you talk some more about using the diagram? I don't think in looking at it, it's not obvious to us, those of us who don't know it, how you would practically use it. Can you give some more examples? I think what you're saying is, if I hear you correctly, is to write out examples of that inspire blame, defensiveness. But what, so can you clarify what does FED stand for and how do you use your diagram?
Okay, yeah, I guess I didn't even say what FED stood for. FED stands for stick to the facts. So the F stands for facts. The E stands for emotions. We cut the emotions in conversations, and no defensive language. So to begin with, you might even start off a meeting with a family that has a lot of tension in it and say, we're going to have a conversation and here's our basic rules. Let's kind of stick to the facts. Let's try to keep our emotion down and try not to be defensive. Well, now they're going to want to know, what's that mean to be defensive? So in the diagram here, you can say, well, that's a good place for us to start. Let's talk about what's defensive. And if they don't ask it, you just simply bring it up. And you say, okay, defensive has to do with our voice. Our voice gets loud. You might ask them what they hear about a voice or in a voice. If you're the parent, you might say, tell me how you know that I'm about to get angry and upset with you. And they might come up with, your voice gets loud, that it's higher pitched. You're talking really fast, or a low voice. Then you might say, well, what do I look like? And then you go into those. So you got to be a little bit tough on that one, because sometimes you may hear some signs that you might not agree with. And sometimes we just have to kind of go with it as the children and other people on the table are trying to figure this out. Once they can identify that, then you can say to them, let's look at your signs. Let's see what yours are about. Then you tell them, we're going to spend a week just observing. Let's just watch what's going to happen. You come back a week later and you get this diagram out and say, okay, how many times did we use blame and excuses and we got in trouble for it? How many times were we able to stop using blame and excuses and do what we know is right? So you use the diagram to allow them to kind of see where blame and excuses is going to take them. But if they stop and get out of that path because they heard themselves and felt the emotions, you get them to stop and do what they know is right, then they're in the plus. Does that help?
That's helpful. So again, it's using blame in terms of blaming yourself, correct? It's not blaming others necessarily.
No, it's blaming others.
Yourself.
No, they will blame others.
Others as well. Okay.
Right. If you walk into a room and you say, what happened in this room? And there's two people in the room. The one who did it could be the person that has ADD, if we'll just use that as an example. And he's going to say, well, I didn't do it. He was doing this and he was doing that. And then the whole thing broke. It wasn't my fault. It was his fault. You might make excuses and say, I couldn't help it. I was doing this. I was working really hard. And then all of a sudden I bumped that and the whole lamp fell down. But it's so they start making legitimate excuses, what sounds legitimate to you. And when those two things don't work because we've heard it 100 times, then we get defensive.
Okay. All right. Suzanne says, I tend to blame myself and admit to mistakes immediately, but I find that my colleagues or bosses get really irritated by that. Mm-hmm. And I also go straight to the emotional side and start to get teary-eyed. This is a person, Suzanne, who wants to go back to work, but she's really worried about those feelings of inadequacy and how they present themselves in the workplace. It sounds very much like what you're talking about.
Yes, and I just wrote an article on that was just in the last issue of Attitude magazine. And,
Yay.
We do beat ourselves up terribly. And we do expose ourselves. We walk into a meeting and we're late and we say, sorry, I'm late. And we call it out to everybody. We tell everybody our shortcomings. Why are we doing that? Why don't we just walk in like anybody else that walks in late for a meeting and sit down? It's because we've been doing this for years and we're trying to cover it. We're trying to make it right. You might just use excuses and say, I couldn't help it. I was on a call and I couldn't get off. Maybe it's true. But if you use that every time, then it just becomes old hat. You're just simply late. So you walk in very quietly, and after the meeting, you tell the person who needs to know why you're late, not the whole room. So you have to take care of yourself first. You have to be able to stop beating yourself up, stop telling the whole world that you're late, that you did this, that you were trying to do something for your child and you did it all wrong, and it didn't work, and now they're angry with me. You got to talk to the right people about these things instead of telling everybody. And we tend to just pour our hearts out to everyone for acceptance, for clarification that I'm okay, I do this, and everybody else does that. But it still changes the perception of who we are.
That's interesting. Kathleen has said, how should an ADHD person defend himself or protect himself without being defensive, since they're so frequently the target because of who they are?
This is definitely where FE and D comes in. In that conversation, you just stick to the facts. You just simply stick to the facts. Here's the situation. Here's what's happening. Don't go into a meeting about something unless you have written down what the facts are first. You don't allow someone to deviate and go into the emotional side. Sometimes people just do that just to get you going, and then they've got a better story to tell or a reason to discipline you.
Okay.
So you stick to the facts, cut the emotion, and do your darndest not to be defensive. And it's hard at first. It takes time to learn this. But if you really work at it, in a few weeks you've got some headway going here. And it feels good.
Really interesting. I think this is a big eye-opener, Joyce. It's a very clear, crisp articulation of something that we do without even, in many cases, being aware of it. So I think that's really helpful. There are a number of people on this webinar who are feeling a tremendous amount of guilt over the past in many cases. One person who said, I had to leave medical school because I couldn't get accommodations and I'm still really filled with shame and anger. And another person who says, I'm just so angry with the way my life went because before I got my ADHD diagnosis. And there, people are wondering, how to cope with guilt and shame about the past, or things that went on in the past.
You can start by learning and writing down all the things that are so positive about you. When we look at what's wrong with us with ADD, we feel stupid. We have problems with time issues. We know that we're forgetful. We know that we're misunderstood because we say things differently. We go off on tangents. We're restless, and the list goes on and on. And I find adults with ADD tend to focus on what's wrong with this picture instead of really looking at exactly what I'm about. I'm creative, imaginative, I'm intelligent, I'm an idea person. We're great with getting ideas. There's so many great people out there in businesses that they're really good at it. We have a sense of humor. We're intuitive, insightful. We're flexible. We can be very entertaining, very animating. And we see the big picture on things, something that so many people don't see. We're very supportive and helpful, and we pick up on things very quickly. So there are many great qualities about us, but we feel this guilt because we're hanging on to the ones that are not so good. And coaching can definitely help you get through some of those by giving you methods and ways to do it. How not to go off on tangents. Well, I have to recognize that I'm on task. If somebody says, one of the famous examples that I use is if somebody says to you, who's the first president of the United States? And you're trying to formulate this answer, and it's such a simple answer, and sometimes you just can't get that name out, and we feel so stupid. So we sit there trying to piece it together, and our brain, just like I was telling you about the train earlier, and how every thought produces another one and another one. So there's our brain picturing every single last thing I've heard about George Washington from the day I was born. And now I've got to sort through this. And I start to sort through it, and I think, oh, there's the cherries. There's the tree they cut down. And that makes great cherry pie, doesn't it? Now, all of a sudden, we're no longer on task. And then we go off like that cherry pie story, and we think about how many Grandma made, and she makes great cherry pies at Christmas, and then how many cherry pies or how many gifts she got me for Christmas. And by the time I have an answer for somebody, I'm on a completely different subject. And people feel like we're not paying attention or we don't care about what they're saying. Then we feel guilty because we did do that, but we don't know how we got there. So sometimes we have to monitor how often do we get off task? How often does that happen every day? It's learning so much about your own personal mind. Again, like it goes back to mindfulness. Learning where is that point in my head that gets me into trouble. I'm on task with the cherries in the tree, but all of a sudden I'm thinking about pie. That just takes me away from the entire subject. And this happens in every aspect of our life. You know, in a research study that I did, there were 22 different ways that ADHD can affect us. 22. So there are many things to be worked on so that we can gain control of that thought process and push it aside. I still have things from growing up that pop into my head and make me angry. But over the years, I've been able to keep pushing it away, pushing it away. I can't make it go away. It's there. That's reality. But I appreciate myself. I'm successful in what I do because I've learned how to push away the past and move forward from whatever the day is, move forward.
Someone has just posted that you're an awesome, authentic speaker. So grateful that you're speaking about the raw emotions. And I do think you're really talking about, you know, the dailiness of having ADHD, which not the abstract, and it's really extremely helpful. To this point of feeling the need to say I'm late, which I think we can all identify with. I know that it's bothers you just coming in and sitting down, and I always watch in awe the people who just don't say anything. Jenny posted something which I identified with immediately. She said, in a situation like that, I feel the need to express that I'm responsible. I know that I'm late. So as opposed to not saying anything, which feels like I'm just a slacker. And she said, I never thought of it the way you're describing it, which is, you know, there's no need to point out to everybody that you were late or to explain why you were late. Mm-hmm. How do you cope with
There's
those?
A simple way that you can help that out so you're not late the next time, because we don't want to just keep repeating the behavior. And right. Everybody should have a planner that has ADD. And you're really remiss if you don't, because planners save us every day. I have meetings every single day, and I have got to be prepared for them, and I've got to be on time. And being on time is not something I was ever good at. Now I'm very good at it. But what I do is in my calendar, my meeting is at 10 o'clock. I already know exactly where to go for the folder that has all the information about the meeting. 15 minutes before 10 o'clock, I have on my calendar, and I've also set a timer on my phone to get prepared to go to your meeting. In other words, stop everything you're doing. Don't say, I just have one more thing to do. This will only take a minute. You know how many, it'll only take a minute we have in our life with ADD? Hundreds of thousands of them. So we don't say that things. If we hear ourselves saying them, we have to back off and just say, no, drop everything, put it out of your hands, and just do what you need to do. I have a mug in my office, and it says, never underestimate the power of a hissy fit. And so I might not want to do and get ready for that meeting because I just have one more little thing to do here. But remember, it takes less than 10 seconds for us to forget. So if you're playing around with that 15 minutes before the meeting, you might even forget the time, period. It's gone. We don't have a great sense of time, and we have to take ownership of that. So I had to discipline myself, and yes, I had my little hissy fit, and then I had to turn around and do what I have to do. We're entitled to have that hissy fit. Sometimes it helps. Just depends on where you want to have it. You know, you have to be careful.
That was really helpful on time management. And since we've got you here as a coach, there are a couple of people who are having a really hard time with paper and bills, and are wondering what your top management techniques are for managing paper and bills.
Well, let's see if I can
In a flash.
This is part of a workshop that I do for adults with ADD, and it's the fifth week of it. And what we do is I use a tickler file, which is a 1 to 31 accordion folder, or you can have 31 hanging folders in a drawer. 31 days in a month. I coordinate with my planner. So today, I'll use today as an example. I have this meeting at 1 o'clock. Yesterday, I needed to work on it and prepare for it. So on the folder, I put the date of 5/27, and below that, the date of 5/28. In my planner on 5/27, there's a time slot that I chose, and I'll just say 10 o'clock in the morning, that I would spend a half an hour reviewing for this webinar. And it says on my calendar, 10 o'clock, it says webinar, and it has this little T next to it with a circle, just a T with a circle, and the T stands for tickler. And I know that at 10 o'clock, I can reach down into that tickler file in the 10 slot. Remember the 1 to 31 accordion, in the 10 slot. And there's that folder that I need to review. Everything is there. And up until that date, anything I think about for this webinar that I want people to know, and I've got a piece of paper in my hand, I just throw it into the folder. So it's all there when I'm ready to review. When I'm done reviewing it, I put the folder in the 28th, which is today, and at 1 o'clock on my calendar, well, actually 12:30, I put on my calendar, we have your webinar, a little T goes there, and there's everything I need for this webinar. No more hunting and searching for everything. You can do that with anything. Let's see, you have meetings to go to. You know, many of us on this call are working in businesses, and you have meetings to go to, or you have school events to go to, and you have this paperwork that goes along with it. And you have to complete this paperwork. So now the paperwork is due on the 1st of the month, so around the 28th or the 30th, something like that, I'm going to put in a folder all of my questions and everything that I need to ask for that meeting. And then it's going to go into the first slot so that I can have everything ready for that meeting. And just grab the folder and go. But my calendar will always cross-reference to the tickler file. That's the best way to manage all paper.
I think a number of people have posted, and I have to say I'm in their camp, that it's hard to remember to go to a tickler file. So one person, Janet, said, I set up all my bills on autopay because I can't remember to go to a tickler file. And someone else said, this sounds like a great system. I could see myself setting it up, but I think I'd then find it too boring to keep it up, too bored to keep it up.
No, it's a very, very rewarding system. And just to tell you that just here in this segment, without all the other 4 weeks that build up to this, it sounds like it would be complicated or I wouldn't keep it up. But in the whole process, in the whole scheme of things, people use these filing systems because they're tired of looking for papers. They're tired of piles of papers all over their house.
So, I mean, in essence, it's motivation really to make a change
Yes. And this class, the first 4 weeks, builds up to that motivation to do that because they start to believe in themselves.
Well, Joyce, this has been incredibly helpful. We only have a few minutes left. Is there anything you'd like to say as we close about this issue of blame, remorse, regret, excuses, defensiveness?
It's very powerful to know what my mind is thinking and what it's doing. It helps me to control many, many situations. I can hear myself thinking, I can hear the negative thoughts, and I can say, turn them off, you're headed in the wrong direction. Restate that, put it into the positive. I can feel myself wanting to be defensive by my body language. And the more that you can observe and identify as a person with ADD, the more success you'll have, and you'll feel so much more freedom because you are in control of your life.
Okay. Thank you so much. Everyone, thank you for your great questions and for being here today, and have a great weekend. And Joyce, thanks again. We really appreciate your thoughts.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.